Good day. Welcome to the Unity Chapter 1, and this is Lesson 3 on blood. All right, so by the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe the main components of blood, including plasma, the red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, blood proteins, and their role in the transportation of substances. Blood clotting, the defense against pathogens, which will be more in the next 2 lessons from now. And a few of these other ones may come up in some other lessons as well. Here we have the textbook pages at the bottom. Make sure you do review those as well. So blood. So blood looks like a liquid that's all uniform red color, but it's actually a mixture of living cells, pieces of cells, and a whole bunch of other compounds in there. So if you took a centrifuge, which spins the blood really, really, really fast, so that all the heavy particles fall down to the bottom, you actually can separate your blood into plasma, the white blood cells and platelets, and then red blood cells. So red blood cells are just under half of what makes up blood. And then you'll see the white blood cells and platelets are just a very, very small percentage, less than 1% of what makes up blood. And plasma is the other portion of blood, just over half. And we'll talk about plasma first. So plasma is the fluid portion of the blood. So it's mostly made of water, about 92% water, 8% dissolved ions. And besides carrying all the blood cells, so it's carrying them all around, it also contains all of these other things like proteins, hormones, urea, dissolved carbon dioxide, glucose, and then other ions that your cells might need. So when you donate blood, it's actually separated into the different parts, and the plasma is given to those that need it to replenish their fluids but don't need the blood. So there's some microscopic pictures of blood cells here. So you can't quite see this, but this is a white blood cell down here. There's another one right here. You can see they're quite big. They stain purple. You see red blood cells. They have that light red color. And platelets are really tiny, very irregular shaped. They're pieces of cells, and we'll talk about them in a bit. So those are the 3 main cells that we're going to look at. So all of these blood cells come from stem cells located in your bone marrow. So within your bone marrow here, you have stem cells, and these stem cells create your red blood cells, your white blood cells, and the platelets. So let's start with red blood cells. You might see them abbreviated to RBC or called erythrocytes. All right, these blood cells are specialized to carry oxygen. That is their main goal, to get oxygen to the tissues and then bring back the waste carbon dioxide so it can get expelled outside the body. So some of their features that help them do this, help them carry oxygen, they have a biconcave disc shape. That means both of the sides kind of go in. So both sides, if you flip this over, it'll look exactly the same. Both sides go in almost like a donut, except there's no hole. It's just very flat and thin in the middle. This helps to increase the surface area so that it can bind to oxygen easier and slide through the blood vessels. They have no nucleus. They are focused on carrying oxygen, so they don't have a nucleus. They have a very short lifespan, hence they don't have a nucleus, so they don't live very long, only 120 days. So like, what's that, 3 months, 4 months? 4 months. And most importantly, they contain hemoglobin. This has a pigment in it, which when oxygen binds to hemoglobin, it's bright red. And this is what gives the blood in your arteries that really red color, that bright red color. And it's less bright when it has carbon dioxide attached to it. So it's more of a dull color. So that's where you actually see the vein color, which is more blue than the actual red or dark red from the blood. And hemoglobin contains iron. It's made up of iron. And it has to have iron in order to absorb the oxygen. So you got to have iron with the hemoglobin. Now, with all the hemoglobin in your body, you can technically hold enough oxygen in your body to survive for 5 minutes without breathing. But without hemoglobin, you only got about 4.5 seconds, and then you're toast. So very important compound. So, a disorder that affects red blood cells. There's a couple here. So, a condition called anemia that occurs if there's just not enough red blood cells. So you aren't be able to carry enough oxygen to your cells. This can happen maybe if you have low iron. You may have heard people describing themselves as anemic. You can take more iron and build up that ability to create hemoglobin. So if you don't have enough iron, you can't make enough hemoglobin, and therefore you decrease the amount of oxygen you get to your cells. So it's really important to make sure you're getting enough iron. Sickle cell anemia, it's a different type of anemia. In this case, this disorder, you're actually born with this, so it's hereditary. And you actually have defective hemoglobin, and it causes the red blood cells to bend in this really weird looking, like there, it's like a crescent moon sickle. It's a sickle shape. Okay, and this causes the blood to be blocked at the capillaries. You can see in this diagram how normal red blood cells would just flow nice and like a little tube going down a water slide. Well, these sickle cells, they all get crammed up in all the corners of the arteries, at the branches, and cause blockages. So they're caused by mutations in the DNA, and yes, it's hereditary, so it's passed on from your parents. I just recently have been reading some articles about this. The bone marrow and stem cell transplants are used to help cure sickle cell anemia in children under 16. And then recently they've been doing some gene replacement therapy. So they're going right into that genetic code and replacing that defective code that causes this sickle cell shape with a code that doesn't. So we'll learn more about that when we talk into the genetics unit. All right, the next kind of white blood cell is the white blood cell, or it's referred to as the WBC, or leukocytes. And their main purpose, their big purpose, is the immune response, which we're going to learn more in lesson 5. But basically, when you have a disease-causing organism enter the body, the number of white blood cells increase so that they can fight off the infection. So if you have a lot of white blood cells, an elevated number more than usual, then it's likely a sign that there's an infection going on that's trying to be contained. So white blood cells have a 13 to 20 day lifespan, very short. They do have a nucleus, and they are the largest of the blood cells. And if you look at the ratio of red blood cells to white blood cells, it's about 700 to 1. So a lot more red blood cells to every white blood cell. So there's some electron microscope image of what each of these cells might look like. So there's your red blood cell, there's your platelet, very strange piece, and then your white blood cells. And there are a variety of different white blood cells that you will learn more about in the immune response in lesson 5. So one white blood cell disease that we're just going to point out right here is leukemia, and this is cancer of the white blood cells. Right? So the number of white blood cells, or leukocytes, in the blood increases, but the cells don't actually function normally, so they're not working properly. All right, the next type of blood cell is the platelets, otherwise known as thrombocytes. And platelets are tiny little pieces of cells, or cell fragments from larger bone marrow cells. And they are key in helping the blood to clot. So when you have a break in your skin and you need to form a scab, it's all about the platelets. They're super important in that formation of a scab and stopping the bleeding. So the clotting process, or forming a scab, here it is. So the skin is cut and blood is excreted. Okay, so the blood's coming out of your capillary. The platelets come into contact. So the platelets, remember, they're always in your blood. So they come into contact with the rough surface edges that were cut, and it causes the platelets to break and rupture. And when they break, they release a chemical called fibrinogen, right? And it converts and forms threads of fibrin. All right, so you get the fibrin, which kind of solidify everything, catch all the red blood cells together. You can see over in this diagram over here, all the fibrin catching all the red blood cells into like a net, and then it forms a scab, and then the clot hardens to form that scab. All right, and again, another disorder with this type of cell would be hemophilia. So hemophilia is another inherited condition. Again, we'll look at it in our next chapter where we look at genetics. It's inherited. It's always inherited from the mother. Mother passes that gene along. That defective gene is on the X chromosome. So basically, if you have hemophilia, you can't clot or very poorly clot your blood. So you can quite easily bleed to death. Sometimes you can get spontaneous bleeding inside your body, or if you fall, that could actually cause you to die if you don't get treatment right away. A lot of people with hemophilia don't live very long. Yeah. It shows up in a lot of these interesting pedigrees that we'll take a look at in chapter 2, and you can see how it passes through a family. All right, so the last slide, just to give an idea of what this might look like under the microscope, a bit more of like a regular microscope that you have in your science class if you had a blood smear. So here's your A is pointing to what a regular red blood cell would look like. B is pointing to the white blood cells. So you can see the dark nucleus inside them. They stain purple. The nucleuses are staining purple, whereas the red blood cells don't have a nucleus, remember? And then the platelets, really tiny partial pieces of cells there. All right, and that's the end of this lesson. Make sure you do your practice questions and then try your self-assessment. Have a great day.